read it either. All right, well, we'll go now to Senator McKenzie.
Thank you very much, AWI. It's been, as you said, Mr Merriman, a busy period of time, and I guess irrespective of your opening statement, I'd like to traverse some of the actions over the past few months to sort of find out how we get to this place today. So I guess my first question is, why did AWI employ Qualitative Recruitment Australia?
Well, it was no decision of mine. I'll get my CEO to answer. Operational.
You mean Axiom?
Axiom was, as I understand it, subcontracted by Qualitative Recruitment Australia.
That's standard practice. The piece of research that was being done was a quantitative piece of qualitative piece of research that was conducted to seek the views of various wool-growing groups. So there was there's two types of breeding philosophies essentially, and I think it's important that the Senate understand that: subjective breeding philosophies and objective breeding philosophies. The very day was quite balanced in the sense that there was four groups. There was objective stud merino breeders and objective commercial clients of theirs in the second group.
Okay, so how do we classify objective?
Can I just finish? Objective breeding, using measurement data technically.
Yep.
And then there was a subjective merino breeders group and a subjective commercial group as well. So there was four groups in those in four focus groups on that day.
And right, so they're all being done on the day. Okay.
Mr Merriman went to the first group.
So Mr Merriman, you didn't go to the other three groups that were on that day?
No, I only went because I was in Sydney that day.
Yeah, but it sounds like the four groups were there.
No, they were on different days, apparently.
Were they on different days?
I think they were all the one day, to be honest. But
that's what I thought you said, Mr McCulloch, just to be clear.
I can check that, but my feeling is it was all done on the 15th of June.
Yep.
And the four groups were there that day.
And running as a typical focus group?
Well, it wasn't typical because there was a mirror. Look, in my time, I can't remember AWI ever conducting a meeting where it observed from behind a mirror. And I certainly wasn't aware that there was this style of meeting was going to be held. And the chairman
Were you one of the observers, Mr.
No,
McCulloch?
I wasn't. I was overseas at the time.
Who was the other AWI observer?
The project manager of that project.
And who was that?
Neil Judd.
Neil Judd. Okay. And was that the only a paid employee, not a board member?
A paid employee.
Yep. Project manager for the research project. Okay. Sorry, continue.
And there was also, I believe, the principal of Axiom, which is a chap called John Logan.
Okay, great. But my understanding is those sort of mirrors are used in market research.
Well, look, we understand that in the commercial world these are quite common practice. In the AWI world and the wool grower world, they're not common practice, to the point where it was reported in the media that halfway through the first session they wanted some water in the room and water appeared.
As if by magic?
As if by magic, because no one had left the room. So there was a failing in the beginning, in the induction or the introduction part by the facilitator. He obviously, and we've looked back, or the Axiom have looked back over the tapes and have admitted this, that the introduction wasn't done adequately enough, in the sense that they weren't explained well that there was a mirror, and they weren't explained well that there was people behind the mirror.
Senator...
right. Yep. Sorry, Mr Merriman.
Just to elaborate, I've attended many of these groups in my time as chairman.
Market research groups?
Market research.
Or stakeholder meetings?
All sorts of meetings. In marketing, in this area, all the groups we've had before in this area, because there are the warring tribes, if I can call them that, different opinions about how to breed sheep. We've put them in a room with a facilitator and a properly facilitated day. Now, I was quite shocked to see that there was a deviation from that in this instance.
Okay. My understanding is that participants in all 4 groups were invited because they are subjective or objective, one of the 2 warring tribes, if you like, and were guaranteed anonymity. Is that correct, Mr McCulloch?
Correct.
Yep. Do you believe that AWI and Axiom complied with that guarantee given to stakeholders?
I do.
Why is that?
We have nothing's been leaked. None of the research has been leaked. No one's apart from the people that volunteered there to say that they were there that day in the media. We certainly haven't published who was there on the day. We haven't published anything they've said on the day. We think the research is still sound, and we think that we can move now on to a qualitative stage of that project.
So why do you think the stakeholders that participated were concerned about Mr Merriman's presence at the meeting, at the research?
Well,
I'm asking Mr McCulloch, Mr
sorry.
Merriman.
Look, I think it comes down to, as I said, different breeding philosophies. I think they...
But that doesn't suggest why they'd be concerned about their chairman.
Well, I agree with you. They had competitive stud breeders in the room with them. They actually compete against each other. So we can only assume that it's a philosophy thing, and that when they discovered that the chairman was viewing them and they didn't know, they reacted to that. The reaction that we got was a little delayed. This meeting was conducted on the 15th of June. We didn't get any evidence of this until the 7th of August. Which is very unusual. There was a.
Did Mr Merriman come out and shake their hand after the? I mean, how would they know he was behind the mirror, or did they know on the day?
He was, as I understand it, he was spotted there. He didn't hide. He wanted to go in the room with them from the get-go. He was forced to behind the mirror. So I've spoken to Mr Merriman, or the chairman, about this on a number of occasions. He had a sandwich out in the public. He went to the bathroom, he said. So he certainly wasn't there to hide. He went with no knowledge of the style of meeting and the way it was going to be conducted.
Let's stop calling it a meeting, shall we, Mr McCulloch? Because it is not a meeting. It's a research focus group, which has certain protocols around it, code of practice. It's not a meeting. And so the longer we call it a meeting, we allow certain behaviours around it that, if you're conducting research that's going to have integrity and be credible for use by AWI and of benefit to your stakeholders, needs to be conducted in a certain way. Would you agree?
I agree.
Yep. All right, so we've got Mr Merriman. Just enlighten me, are you in the subjective camp of the war or objective philosophy?
Well, like a lot of those breeders, we all measure.
Yeah.
I mean, I would argue there's only one stud that measures more than me.
No, I appreciate that, Mr Merriman.
But you said
I'm trying to
subjective or
understand.
objective. There
We've
is
got
no
two groups.
one or another. There are blends.
So which is your study in the objective or the subjective breeding philosophy?
Well, I'd let other people do that. I test my sheep right out. I take sheep right out to an old age and test them all the time. So does that make me subjective or objective?
I'm just using the language your CEO used on how we split up the research groups on that day. I want to know which group your stud belongs to.
Well, I don't use ASPVs, and it might be one way to split them.
So, Mr McCulloch, just going back to unless those that are using ASPVs are in the objective group?
Yeah, that's right.
And those that don't are the breeders that use other methods?
Well, and there's everything in between. I mean, you're talking about the two extremes here, and there's every gamut between those. I mean, the point of it is, from a company's point of view, we aim to operate with a balance.
You've got a deal.
And actually, the focus group was a great demonstration of that balance on any one day.
But how you split your stakeholders was, you said earlier, you had the subjective merino breeders group and the objective merinos group.
Yeah.
Yep. So can I classify how you determined the objective merino breeders group to be those that use the sheep values?
Yeah.
Yep. Okay. And you don't use those, Mr Merriman, so that would mean you're in the subjective group.
Well, I wouldn't say that. I mean, I test my sheep.
No, I'm just going by the criteria AWI used to form the focus groups, Mr Merriman. That's all I'm doing. So, Mr McCulloch, we had the chair, who's from the subjective Merinos group, viewing the objective focus group. Did we have anybody from the objective Merinos group viewing the subjective Merino group's research?
Not that I'm aware of.
Not that you're aware of.
The chairman...
Would Mr Judd know?
He would know.
Okay,
But
where's Mr Judd
I don't
now?
think that's likely. I think the only other people in the viewing after the chairman left was the project manager and an Axiom.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to go, Mr Merriman, on how you got behind the mirror. How did you get there?
Well, firstly I'd be given 2 addresses.
Okay, by who?
I rang that morning to find out which was the right address. So
Yep.
I got directed to the office and I went in there and I said, well, here I am. And they said, no, you can't go in there and sit in the room.
Who's they?
This was Axiom, the people who ran it.
And what reason did they give?
Well, they said, I said, well, look, I'm here to observe it.
Yep.
I'm the chairman. I'm allowed to go to meetings all over the company and I want to go and see really what's going on. It's using company funds. I'd had complaints from, or concerns from growers about the meeting and I was in Sydney, so I went. When I got there, they said, I can't sit in a room like this, and they took me up to where the people are.
But they did try and dissuade you from entering the room and participating, as you'd sort of arrived to do.
Guys, I've just had some information that the clicking of the cameras is causing some distraction from witnesses who are trying to focus on answers. So could I encourage the still photographers to take your sample of photographs, and because the scene's not going to change much, and then we might try and get some silence off on the media side. Thank you. Sorry, Senator.
What about if they cough when they click?
McKenzie.
Oh, I just thought I'd offer
Do they have to be here? Do they? Can they take a photo and go?
Well, I've just...
It's a public hearing, Mr Merriman.
Mr Merriman,
So
I've
they're
just
entitled
encouraged
to be
them to
here.
do that, and hopefully
Cameras all around the
they'll
room.
complete their work in a moment or two and we'll be
It's
right.
only got them going more.
So, Mr Merriman, Axiom, who's conducting the research, the qualitative research focus groups for AWI, says you really can't participate in this group. What was the reason
they said they didn't want me in the room.
Why is that?
Well, I don't know, because I said that every time we've had groups like this, me and other directors have been in the room.
But were they research groups that you conducted, or facilitating stakeholder meetings?
We've had
facilitated
many
meetings.
meetings like this, with OJD, with genomics, various different topics. And,
Sorry, Mr Mayor, I'm trying to get a difference between a facilitated discussion with your stakeholders is different from conducting a research activity.
Well, at the end of the day, AWI has to pay for it, and these inputs go into some project that the shareholders have to pay for. Mm-hmm. And I was there interested to see what was going on.
Why weren't you interested in the other 3 focus groups?
I saw the process and I left.
Senator, to probably clarify, the first workshop was the focus group, was the one that the chairman actually attended. He wasn't aware of what grouping he was actually attending. When he arrived, and he was advised by Axiom that he couldn't sit in the room as he wished to do, like he normally does at meetings or various focus groups, whatever we want to call them, with wool growers. He was directed by Axiom to sit behind the mirror. Once he saw what was actually happening, he then left. So he wasn't aware that he was sitting in on any particular meeting. He then left once he'd actually seen what he came to see in terms of the focus group. And I think it's fair to say what he's actually said was, and as Mr McCulloch said, this isn't standard practice for AWI. We've never done this type of focus group before in terms of behind a mirror. We would never be doing it again. So we've apologised, Axiom have apologised in terms of how they didn't disclose to the participants of the first workshop that the full disclosure in terms of AWI observers would be observing that first focus group. That was actually remedied on the following 3 focus groups.
But so you said the 3 the later 3 market research focus groups of that day were also advised that they were being observed directly through the one-way mirror.
Yeah,
They were
it's
correctly
quite
advised.
clear
And
that
some in that
Axiom
day.
did a thorough induction to the other parties that attended the other 3 groups, but they admit they didn't thoroughly do it for the first group, which was one of the things that went wrong.
So Axiom had said, Mr Merriman, it's not really appropriate that you go into this research focus group as chair.
Sit in the room, yeah, sit in the room.
Actually, sorry to clarify, they actually said that for any observer from AWI or the owner of Axiom was actually asked to stand behind the mirror as well. So it wasn't just identifying Mr Merriman as the chair, the AWI program manager was also asked to sit behind the mirror.
So what did Mr Judd say when Mr Merriman, you informed him that you wanted to go to the focus group?
We just said, yeah, here's the address.
He said no problem.
He said, yes, if you want to go, you can go. That's what.
And any caveats on that?
Well, the only caveats when I got there, and they said, we don't want you sitting in the room, we want you sitting over here in the other room.
Do you understand how research is conducted? I mean, there seems to be there is some perception that AWI has a culture of bullying, of public shaming of certain stakeholders, and that why your presence for this particular cohort of stakeholders might have caused them unease and actually damaged the integrity of the research. Do you accept those claims?
Well, I don't know how I could bully them if they're not there, if they thought I wasn't there, if they didn't know I was there. I mean, I was there looking after shareholder interests. I have to know what's going on. That would become a paper to, if it was big enough, to come to the board. And I think it's important that I reach down and find out what's going on in these things.
But those stakeholders were very, very concerned when they actually learnt that you were in any way having an understanding of what they thought was a confidential discussion about the future of AWI.
I'm bound by confidentiality. You have not heard one word of this from my lips.
No, but what we do know from reports is that there are issues of public shaming, for instance, at the 2016 AGM of 2 stakeholders that had been identified individually as ungrateful.
Excuse me, I publicly shamed some people.
Not you. AWI as a culture is what I'm talking about.
How did they...
Mr McCulloch, you might like to enlighten the room on the 2006 AGM comments about